Okay. So it is 5:40, and we are going to convene this meeting of the Finance and Personnel Committee. We have all members present except for Ms. Davis, who had a family obligation that happened at the last minute and couldn't be here with us this evening. We are also joined by Ms. Sarah Thompson, who is not a member of the Finance Committee meeting, but is also here with us tonight. So just to walk through where we are for today's meeting, we are going to start with a discussion of the proposed Finance Committee budget. This is the budget that we went through, the superintendent had spoke to earlier this Tuesday. As each committee, as we go through that, we will have on the big screen kind of the summary of what the proposed cuts were that would get us to 4.7% in the tax rate. And we would have discussion on each item as a finance committee, and also Sarah, you're welcome to join in on that discussion as well. But knowing that we will be working with these as a slate, and then when we feel like we have exhausted our options in terms of the proposals, we will take the final number that we have and have that be the proposed action for tonight, in which we will. And in that event, we will open it up to public comment as part of the motion. Okay. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the administrative cuts proposal. Superintendent Batana, you had mentioned that there was an adjustment to the original number that you had, that you were able to.
Yes. So we have looked at it based on some of the discussions that I had with members of the Finance Committee, and we have revised amount for that of $825,956. Included in that are many of the cuts that you had seen before, and just we removed a couple of positions that were key positions that I did not feel comfortable losing in the balance.
Okay.
So do we want to vote on each?
Not take a formal vote. I think we're going to have a discussion on each item, and then we will add or take off as the discussion moves. So can we get the updated number on that spreadsheet? Under administrative cuts, it should be 870.
825.
That's what I'm saying. Do you want me to change it as we talk about it?
Yeah.
Alicia, can you blow that up a little more? One more. Yeah.
We can't see the. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it
Oh, I just
deleted.
deleted a row. Just kidding.
It's okay. We can. It does.
Delete cells. There.
Okay. So my understanding is that this is all within central office. I think that it's a deep ask, but I think this is something that I can feel like I can support, and so I'm going to put that out there just to start the discussion.
Thank you. So we, we had our executive session a few weeks back, and we went over the specifics that make up these proposed cuts. And I know we had a discussion, and part of the concern that we had for some of the proposed cuts was the added workload that it would present to the superintendent, the added workload it would present to some of the other key people in each department. And at that point, I did not feel that the wholesome or even some of the bigger items on that list would have made the working environment more efficient. And again, I was saying that as somebody who is still kind of learning the specifics of what goes on day to day in central office. So I'm inclined at this point, having had a conversation of what is not included in this adjusted figure, I'm inclined to support this particular cut. I would like to, before I decide completely, I'd like to, of course, listen to what Mark and even Sarah would have to say about it. But again, at this point, I think this is something that I can consider.
So I haven't been updated on the change, but I'm not sure if that's going to affect my thoughts. At this point, based upon our discussion in the executive session, and the way that I want the superintendent to be able to run this school district, I would not support most of the administrative cuts. I would support what we had described as, I guess, the least worst cut, and that would just be, I think, affect one position, perhaps. And so that's as much as I can say, without getting into detail. But otherwise, I don't want to affect the way the superintendent is setting up, the way he's running his staff, and the way he believes will affect the way he runs the school district. And so that's where I'm right now.
If I could ask a question, and I know that this is again, when I ask questions, it's hard to quantify the answers that I'm asking for, so I'm kind of asking for an opinion. Clearly, this is not part of the superintendent's initial proposed budget, so this is not the way that Javier envisioned central office functioning, and it's certainly not the way that we had initially envisioned it being at its most efficient way to conduct business. I wanted to ask Javier, obviously with being limited to what we can discuss within that list, I wanted to ask Javier, what increased workload does he expect to have after these cuts? And again, I understand that we can't really go into many details about the positions, but if there's a way to give us a picture of what the workload would be like for you guys if these cuts took place. I don't know if that's a fair question, but as much as we can get clarity on that.
It's difficult to quantify. I mean, obviously, as you said, this is not a part of my original budget proposal, and it will affect departments throughout central office. It won't allow us to move forward, particularly in the academics area, with some of the investments in, the academic work that we were proposing to do this coming year, but it's obviously it's part of the reductions. I mean, I did listen to some of the concerns that you raised about the impact on my ability to get the job done, and so some of the, the delta between that million and the 800 is sort of reinstating some of those supports, and so it's, again, not ideal. It is not the budget that I set out originally, but it's, it's a place where I believe that we can continue to do our work with, with high quality, so.
Did you?
I really wasn't going to weigh in on your finance committee meeting, but what the hey. So knowing all of the reductions that are in front of us and knowing that we have to do something, I think any reduction whatsoever is going to be painful. So I don't take it lightly, but I can support the 825, 956 administrative cuts. Yeah. That's, I guess, all I have to say at this time. None of it's easy. Thank you.
So we'll keep that up there for now. Middle school electives. Does anyone want to lead us off? Roberto?
I cannot support that.
With middle school electives, my understanding is we're talking about music, arts, languages. I cannot support cutting that.
So just to be clear, we're only talking, in that specific cut, we're only talking, and I don't mean only as in it's not important, but it is not all of those subject areas. It is general music at the middle school and another elective that will vary from one school to the other, but it's not all of those others.
Okay.
It's not all of
It'll
those.
vary.
It's just.
Yeah, I will not support that.
I think that when it comes to looking at where our youth are at in middle school, having access to music arts programming is important. So I would also like to take that off the table. So elementary class size.
I'll start. I will not support that cut.
Can we have just a brief explanation and summary of what the increased class size would look like? And I'm kind of assuming,
Pick one or the other, whichever.
as part of the explanation, maybe we can discuss what we consider or what the state considers to be a recommended class sizes, and then paint that picture of what just paint a picture again, contextualize what an increase in class size would look like and the effects it would have, at least in your view.
So this is projected to be a reduction of 7 elementary positions. It is, as we've researched it going back, I would suggest that it isn't an increase in class size as much as it is the management to our existing guidelines. So we, as you saw at the last meeting, shared with you the guidelines that have been in place for a number of years, and this is managing within those guidelines. So what you see up there now is under, sort of with our current ratios, the class size that we would expect next year in all of our schools by grade. And so the ones that we highlighted in yellow are those where the difference between the maximum that you would have and what is there is within one student. So, if the maximum is 20, anything that's above 19, if it's 23, anything that's above 22, and so on. So that's what it looks like now. So you see that there's a significant number of classrooms, even today, that are within those categories. In fact, we have some where we exceed those categories for a variety of reasons. The way that we actually staffed, so if you want to slide to the next one, this is a little bit of a sort of a take on what it would be, what it would look like if we actually managed to those guidelines. And so what you see there are a number of those yellows remain yellow, but some of them actually become green and a couple of them actually become red. And green means that the class size is actually going down, whereas in other cases, the class size is going up slightly. So, and otherwise, it's, in some places it's going up, but it's going up and still well below that threshold. So in this case, none of those actually go above the threshold. They all just stay, there are places where we now are close to being at the threshold, but, still within those guidelines. So although this isn't an ideal situation, I think the exercise has been helpful to us in terms of understanding understanding how sort of loosely that is managed right now. So I think this is an exercise in position control, which any school district really ought to do much more sort of closely than we probably have been doing. So I think it's an opportunity for us to sort of restart on that and be in a place where we'll have a clear, rational implementation of a guideline that's actually been in place for a long period of time. So that's a long way to say that I'm still comfortable with this, even though I know that it is not something that everybody favors.
And I have a follow-up question to that. So in the past, when we've had an increase in student enrollment in the late summer, for example, at East End, how would these reductions, I mean, how would they factor into any unexpected enrollment increases?
So we would guarantee keeping positions as they currently are and only increase if we went over that threshold. Again, these are projections based on rolling over our current numbers. If the, obviously, kids may not come back or a whole bunch of kids may show up in one grade. So we don't know what these numbers are, but our commitment would be to manage to those. So if, just like this year when numbers were high at East End, we increased kindergarten teacher, and we would do the same thing in the future if we passed that threshold.
Any discussion?
This is this is a really difficult one for me. This is a really tough one for me to get behind. I appreciate the superintendent expressing that he could get behind this and he could see this not being a negative hit, or have a negative effect on student learning. I go back to conversations that I've had with the superintendent and even some teachers where we talk about, you hear things like, oh, this year I have a great class, or last year I had some very challenging situations. And so we know that things fluctuate, even regardless of the size of the class. It's unique to the individuals. And I go back to this, as an elementary school parent, I go back to this, you hear things like, it takes many years for a kid to make up for having a bad teacher. I'm assuming it takes many years for a kid to recover from being in a bad class. Bad class meaning that there's challenging students that maybe require more attention from a teacher, and then in a way kind of takes it away from others. And so I know that the number of students in the class does not dictate how many unique challenges it has. You can have a 16-student class and it'd be much more challenging than a 22 student class, or a student class that has 22 children in it. It sounds like, Mark, you already voiced that you wouldn't support this. Unless Jenna has an opinion or something right now, I think I would like us to maybe leave this one and come back to it later. I have a lot more to process. And at this point, I don't think I can support it, but I want to leave it there, at least for now, especially having heard superintendent's explanation.
I also feel that this is a hard one for me, but I do have an open mind. But I also hear, and I also feel better about it considering Superintendent Batana's explanation. I think we should just continue down on the list and then see where we land. This is going to be a hard one. Elementary world language.
I cannot support that.
I will not support that cut.
I don't either. I've been here when we have eliminated that program, and I've also been here when we reinstated it, and this is this would be a huge step back in the progress that we've made in the world language department. Yeah, we can take, sounds like we could take it off the table. Closing Peaks Cliff.
I will start off by saying I cannot, under any circumstance, support that. I want to add to it that we had I didn't realize how packed the room got. We had a lot of Peaks Island residents show up on Tuesday. We've had them strongly show up in our email inboxes. Holla, there you go. This. And Cliff, there you go. Represent. I hope that this process and the opportunity that the residents of the islands have had to come out here and express not only their stance on this budget, but the value that the residents of that community have to the entire city of Portland. I hope that that's been as valuable to the rest of this community as it's been to me. I've always appreciated what the islands have had to offer, but I don't think that I yet, and I don't think I ever will fully understand the value of that community. I think it's incredibly unique. I think it's a gem in this state. And I'm so proud of all of you guys that have shown up and have advocated so strongly for your families, for your schools, for your children. I'm thrilled. You just cannot understand how emotional that made me. And I'm I'm an emotional guy. I am, again, strongly against this, and I could confidently say that for the rest of my term as a school board member, I cannot consider that as an option for any budget process. Thank you.
I cannot support those cuts. When I went and campaigned last year to get on the board, I went out to Peaks Island. I also went out to Cliff Island, and I introduced myself to people, and I asked them, "What are you most concerned about?" And each time, people would tell me, closing that school. And so they told me, "Don't close that school." And they explained why it was so important. And it was echoed in what the speakers said in the last meeting, as well as the turnout tonight. And like Roberto, I will not support any budget that closes either Peaks or Cliff Island elementary schools.
Ms. Thompson, you also had something to say.
I'm not going to go over it because I concur with my colleagues. The only thing I just want to make sure that's clear from some of the emails that we got, that this was not a suggested reduction from the superintendent. It was the result of discussions that were done at the finance, because I think that there has been some emails that have said, shame on you, and I know he's got a thick skin, but as you know, we all develop over the time. But I just want to make sure that it's clear to people that this was not something that the superintendent wanted to bring forward, nor did any of us. It was just one of the items to talk about. And I don't support it whatsoever. But again, I just want to make sure that we shifted away from the superintendent wanting to close it, because that's not the case. Thank you.
I appreciate that clarification, Sarah, and I also would like to echo that we did, as a committee, discuss what are the things that could help get us to, a tax impact at 4.5%. And, unfortunately, it was one of those things that could help. But it's also a non-starter for me and for, I think, many of us on the board, for our community. So I think we can take that off the list. ELL ed techs.
Superintendent, can you just explain a little bit more about that, please?
So these are I believe, 4 positions that at one point were ELL ed tech. So these are staff that we hire to support engagement with language minority communities in schools. They can translate for students, they can translate in the office, they can work with kids on their learning and adapting to the school. And these are now legacy positions in that the individuals, the positions that we've actually singled out are positions where the language that those individuals speak is no longer prevalent in that building. So they're now just added ed tech capacity at that building, but they're not there for the function that they were originally hired to carry out. In many cases, they've been replaced with ELL ed techs that actually speak the language that is prevalent in that school. So doing this is, from my perspective, it's similar to the class size one. It's an efficiency and adjustment, a tighter management of the resources than what we've done to date. These individuals would not lose their positions outright. They would be able to avail themselves of whatever seniority rights they have through their union contract. So, it's very feasible that they would be either sort of replace somebody who has less seniority in that building or move to a different building where they would be able to, because of their seniority, take a position from somebody else. It would be a reduction of positions, but these are considered excess ed tech positions in those schools.
I can support that cut.
So this is an item that when it first came up in our finance meeting, my initial kind of reaction was, yes, these 3 positions or these 3 individuals, the language that they're facilitating, we might not have a need for it, but the need for language interpreters is still present. There's just different languages. So eliminating the positions does not allow us then to compensate for the need that's constantly being created. We mentioned the increase in Portuguese speaking students. So again, I would be hesitant to support this because, again, it limits us from growing as need arises. Or no, it does not.
But that's not the case. I mean, so case in point, when we started the newcomer center at King this year, we needed ed tech staffing that was bilingual, and we added that without eliminating. So I think that the point to this is that in this particular case, we're eliminating what has become just excess ed tech capacity in buildings that is not specifically connected to those languages. It does not mean that we won't, when we need ed techs that speak a certain language at a building, we've added those positions. We've just not eliminated the ones that we no longer need because of the language. Again, schools can use all of the resources. These folks are not sitting around waiting for somebody, from Cambodia to arrive and, then work. They're working their tails off every day. But in terms of how we staff buildings and the particular need for those positions, it's not something that is sort of critical to the operation of the school at this point.
So I appreciate the clarification on that because, like I said, when we discussed it, I didn't have the same understanding. So if my takeaway from that explanation, Javier, is that this would not limit us from meeting the needs that are present,
That's right.
particularly as they shift, the needs shift. Okay. So I think with that explanation and again, an understanding that the needs would be met as they arise, I think I could I'm inclined again to support this particular cut, so we can leave that up there for now.
Yeah, I would concur with my colleagues. I think that this is one area where we've been able to find some efficiency within the positions, and that we'll still be able to meet student needs. Okay. Retirement incentive. This is, this would be predicated on 18 positions.
Yes.
And, yeah, I think we've all said at certain points that we would support this, so,
I support this.
yeah, okay.
So this is one that all along has been on my list of things I would support. And maybe this is not the right time to say this, but I would add this, and we did have this discussion. The way that we do this, the way that it's the process that we take to give out the incentives, that's really what's going to be important. I had a conversation with a retired teacher earlier this week who received, at the time that she retired, a lump sum amount, and not to her knowledge at the time, when it was time to file her taxes, that extra amount knocked her up to the next tax bracket. She ended up having to pay an amount of taxes that she never expected to. So it never really, it was not a benefit to her to grab that incentive and retire. Now, she was fine because she had already made other arrangements for her retirement, and she financially she was secured. But again, the way that we carry this out would be obviously incredibly important. Now, having said that, I am inclined to support that cut as well, and I know that we've had multiple conversations, including with the PEA about this. So I'm inclined to support it.
Yeah, I would be as well, and so I think we can safely move that up the list. School resource officer.
Mr. Superintendent, can you speak to this, please? Just two positions.
This is in essence eliminating the two positions that we currently contract with the city's police department to provide SROs at both, one at Deering, one at Portland High School.
I cannot support this cut, and that is because the superintendent intends to brief us on the latest emergency preparedness program so that the school board can review it and look for any improvements or efficiencies. So at this point, to cut them, I don't think would be practical.
So this is an item that I had throughout the process put on my list of things I can support. And to start with, I am not, and this probably is something very unique and personal to me, but I, at first thought, or at first kind of impression, I'm not necessarily in love with the idea of having police officers full-time in our campuses. But then I learned more, and these are not just police officers. This is not, the same cop that was, that I had to deal with when I was younger. These literally with the explanation, it was incredible. I didn't mean me personally. I mean, what I've learned and what I really look forward to learning more about is the extra value of these officers in our schools, because what I've learned is that they sound more like social workers. They sound more like counselors than they do the police officers, the way that I immediately think of a police officer. And I have a lot to learn about how policing is done these days, being removed from from those processes. I will not support this cut. And I would add that, I will add that I still would like to have at some point a conversation about having this value provided more equitably across our district. Like we said, we only have them in 2 of our high schools. Catskill Bay and Pat's do not have a resource office. Our middle schools do not have that. So I'd like us, not just in the board, but I mean, as a city, have a discussion about, with the police department, about how else can we expand that community policing and that value that we've learned is being provided in our 2 high schools. So moving forward, I would entertain that conversation. And again, for this particular issue, I will not support that cut.
Sarah or Tim, did you want to weigh in on this particular?
Yeah, I wouldn't vote for a budget at all if we cut that, so, thank you.
I also agree that I think, given the climate that we're in, with a lot of school safety being an area of focus, this seems like a regressive cut to have on the table. So I think we have some consensus to move that. Crossing guards.
I'm sorry, I cannot support that cut.
I cannot support that cut.
All right, you can take it off. Facilities, this was contracted services and facilities. Could you speak more to it?
These were just additional cuts, prior to putting the budget out. We went through our operational departments in particular and, tried to trim around certain areas. And I think that this is, I don't remember the specifics. Part of it was the rate of reimbursement to the city for their increase for maintenance and
HVAC.
yeah, and HVAC that went up by.
So in HVAC, it'll be just services we won't receive. So it'll be just cuts across the board. And then the other piece is an increase, and we're trying to negotiate that stepped over a period of time.
Yeah.
Discussion?
So one of the discussions, one of the questions that came up through the process, and I believe it was Tim who brought it up, was the concerns for something like this, considering the history that we've had, and more recently, the concerns that we've had for our maintenance. And I think the explanation that was given at that time, maybe we can recap that or review that once again. Do you remember what the question was? Yeah.
So these are contracted services. So in one case, these are both city contracts. So in one case, the city just won't provide services, and they'll make the cut on their side as well. And that's something that our facilities director has talked about. And the other piece is in our athletic field maintenance, and this is something we do need to still negotiate with that department, whether it's services that we just don't receive, or we'll need to work that out. But this is not repair and maintenance issues. This is not, building upkeep and that kind of thing. This is something that, it was a $50,000 increase that we received in one place, and we're asking to do half this year and half in the future. That does have an effect on their budget as well, so that's something that we're going to need to work out, but we're trying to work collaboratively on that one.
So with that explanation and the rest of the summary, I could support this cut.
I can support that cut.
And I as well. All right, board contingency. I believe the summary of this one is that the board contingency for the last 4 or 5 years has been $175,000. And the proposal is to reduce the board contingency to $75,000. And so is there a summary? We'll get to questions and discussion later, but go ahead.
So Member Thompson had asked that we just go back through the last 4 years and look at sort of our use of this fund. And the highest expense we've had is $87,000. And that was to kind of cover some reductions in other aspects of the budget. The other 3 years, we've been nowhere near that. So we felt that we could make this without any effect to operations. Obviously, it's a contingency, so you do it for unplanned expenses, but we've not spent that amount in the last 4 years.
Discussion?
Can I just add something to that? So just for the new board members as well as the public. So, excuse me, the board back along, we didn't have any flexibility with regards to being able to do reports. And you'll see on our website a lot of reports that were done, whether it be for reviewing HR or reviewing district lines or capacity or we did one on compensation. That all of it came out of the board contingency. We bought boilers sometimes from our board contingency, so I want to make sure that it's clear. While it says board, it provides, over the years, the cost centers have gotten so tight, too tight. And this gives us a little bit of wiggle room if a boiler goes, or like this year when the lunch, or maybe this past year, the lunch money went over, we covered the cost of the lunch money. And so I'm not willing to let that go because we need that flexibility. We also have a contingency of folks that want to look at redistricting or consolidation, and I think we need to get to the bottom of whether that makes any sense whatsoever, and so that will require us to hire somebody as well. And so I think that it would be short-sighted for us to cut that because we probably will need it. Thank you.
So I had, Sarah and I had talked about this, and she gave me a better explanation of what this board contingency has been used for, especially after having had Alicia send out that information. If I can suggest we choose a different name for this category, because it really looks like that's how the board hangs out at night, and that's how we pay for it, you know what I mean? So, but I especially considering that we're discussing cuts and we're discussing trimming down, what we have, and understanding that this allows us some flexibility in the future, and that it has been used that way in the past, and it seems in a very responsible manner. I don't feel I can support cutting this.
I cannot support cutting that, considering that does give us some wiggle room, as well as allows us to actually look into redistricting and consolidating and any other reports or studies that we want to do. So I cannot support that cut.
I just wanted to add one more thing, is the board controls that money, so that's why it also says board in front of it, because it can't just get spent. And so that's, again, why we called it board, because not that anybody would spend the money on their own, but they have to come to us and ask us in order to be able to use it, and we have to evaluate what the usage is for. So I just want to make sure that's why it says board, because we control that. Not that we don't, that's under our jurisdiction.
And through that understanding, then the process that it would take for us to use that money will be a public one. So it's
Very
not like
much
we'd
so.
be sliding money left and right without people knowing.
correct.
So having said that, again, I feel comfortable. I don't want to use my words right. I do not feel comfortable making that cut.
I'm going to be in the minority here, but given that this is our process, I appreciate the views of my colleagues. I think that with this budget, and the process that we have, this is not something that we've the closest we've ever gotten to exceeding the fund. We didn't even broach 50% of it, and so in expenditures. And so I think, maybe reducing it to 75,000 is too low, but I would consider amending this to, to reflect either 75 or 50,000. I think we do have, I think, given the context in which we're we're trimming other areas, it makes sense that we've historically, never even broached 50% of exceeding this fund. And so I would just put that out there for colleagues to consider.
So then what will you propose cutting, what the cut would be? 50%?
No.
Of the total?
I would look at reducing the board contingency. The proposed cut is 100,000. I would put out there for my colleagues to consider 75 or 50,000, but I guess that's up for discussion if.
I just want to add one more thing. I guess being the most senior member of the board and having been here from crisis in 2006 to where we are currently, I feel like we're back in 2006, to be honest with you. But there are years, Jenna, that and I'm sorry, I don't want to direct it towards you. In general, we've used all of that money. We only looked back the last 4 years, but if we look back the last 12, there have been years that we've exceeded that, especially those heavy years where we really had to have so many different reports done to get our financial house back in order, to get our HR and PAR across the country, to make sure that we're compensating people accordingly. And so, again, I understand the pain everywhere else, but again, it allows the flexibility, and I think this coming year is going to be a big year for us to really, we've talked about the potential of redistricting and closing schools, and I think the angst of that alone for people is very real, and I think we need to finally have that conversation. We haven't updated it in over 7 years. Get that done and see, is it really true? People say we can redistrict, we can do this, we can do that, and this will show us whether we can or we can't. And so, again, there have been years that we've exceeded it, so I just want to put a cautionary note there that it might seem like an easy trim, but it really, we've paid, good money to consultants to get stuff done, so that's all.
Yeah, with that said, I do anticipate that we would need either reports or some kind of studies into redistricting and consolidation, not only the infrastructure, but the impact on programming and services to the students. So I'll just stay with what I said earlier, that I cannot support this cut.
All right, so it comes off. Oh, sorry, Tim.
I think I would join you in the minority, Jenna, on this. I think this is one of the ones that I could get behind. And if it was a reduction from the $100,000 cut, I think that would be okay. But we're making so many cuts elsewhere that, or we're considering so many cuts elsewhere that I think that it makes sense, since the recent history is that we haven't used it as much as we've allocated. This does seem like an easier place to me to trim.
It's amongst the three of you, right?
Yeah, and so given that I am still in the minority of this existing finance committee, we can safely say that could be pulled off. So moving on to high schools, this was, I believe, a
To be determined.
Yeah, TBD.
So we're still working with the principals to actually identify the program cuts, the personnel cuts that would be involved in this. It would be things that would be specific positions where particular programs would cease to exist, as well as probably some cuts in their per student funding, and some co-curricular stipends and things along those lines. So I don't have the specifics yet. We've been working with the principals to get to that, but that we committed to finding $400,000 worth of that.
Okay. So we've been out of compliance in the past for Title IX for our sports, and then when you were talking about reducing stipends, I think we would need to keep in mind, too, that if we reduce something, a particular sport on one side, the equivalent on the other side, we would have to do as well. So I think we need to keep that in mind, too, if we're talking about stipends, say, for cross-country, you have to, the girls and the boys potentially go, or whatever its equivalent is. So I just want to make sure that, we think about that, too, keeping that balance, because
We would,
we have
would
gotten.
obviously.
Well,
want
I
to
know
do
you
that.
would, but I'm just saying that.
Discussion.
I would not support those cuts.
Can I ask what the timeline would be like to understand what materially those cuts would be?
It would have to be, probably by Tuesday, we would have to know.
Yeah, we'd have to know by Tuesday.
I mean, I think just question mark $400,000, I definitely wouldn't support that. But, depending on what it is, I don't know. I would have a very, very hard time supporting $400,000 of unknown cuts.
No, as it's laid out right now, I cannot support that.
Okay. Taken out?
Yep, so, yeah, we can safely take that out. So we still have elementary class size that we wanted to revisit, but we also had additional, I believe there's some additional questions that folks had around there was a request for more information around the investments and additions to the FY19 budget. And that was one of the handouts that we were given. And I don't know if Finance Committee members had any follow-up discussion or questions related to this, but I think this would be now the opportune time to talk about it.
Jenna, I'm sorry. Can we go back to the other list? I was
Going back where?
to this one. To this one here. I was hoping, I wanted to revisit the elementary class size before we
Okay.
finalize. Even though I wanted to stay up there for now, I'm still on the fence on that one. I don't mean to sound unsure, but I am. I don't know what else to say. And that's a tough one. Yeah.
So I think we could move on and come
Yeah,
back to
let's
it.
just move on. I'm sorry.
So I think that's what we were hoping to.
Before we do, maybe we can just get a little more insight, something for us to think about, is if we didn't have to make these cuts, would you still evaluate, the class size and still come up with the second page? Would you still come up with that without these, this budget?
The enrollment.
Yeah, so probably. I mean, I think that, sort of this exercise, as I mentioned earlier, has been helpful in terms of understanding what our, sort of how we're staffed at the elementary schools. I think that Board Member Rodriguez talked about the fact that, sometimes a larger class with, really easy kids is better than a smaller class with a few really hard kids. So I do believe that some of those variations and variances that you see in those are not just random, but, caused by decisions that were made by smart principals working with dedicated teachers, trying to figure out how do we mitigate for the fact that we've got, some really difficult kids in this particular class. And so that might be as much of an explanation as, sort of it's just slipped. But I do think that for us as responsible managers of resources, it's incumbent on us to sort of understand where those variances are and, manage to them. And that's something that we will absolutely do going forward, whether or not this class size cuts gets implemented as part of the budget.
Thank you.
I just have a clarifying question. In some of these classrooms, there are ed techs as well, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And so looking at this, we have 5 classrooms going down in size, we have 5 remaining the same, and only 2 going up, as it currently stands projection-wise. So 2 classrooms, the ones in red, are the only 2 that would go up?
No,
I don't take that lightly.
There are other classes that are going up, but they're going up and do not exceed that sort of threshold that
Okay.
we arbitrarily came up with, which was one short of the class size cap for those classes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, when you say the class size cap, that's the state maximum?
It's not the state max, it's the one that we are managing to, which is the 20 in kindergarten, 23 first through third grade, and 25 in fourth and fifth grade.
Can I just speak to this? So that state number that I showed you, that was not the maximum. Like, we are nowhere near the state maximum. That was the DOE ratio that they give us credit for in our ED 279. That was not the class size model. So I don't think was abundantly clear when we met the other day, so I just wanted to say that out loud.
Yeah, thank you.
So Alicia, to follow up on that point, because the way that we receive credit from the state based on what effect long-term does it have on the way that the state would,
So as we reduce teachers, we get a higher, it essentially gets us closer to that state ratio. So that number, that 15, 17 number that we talked about, that includes sort of all teachers as well. So music and all those things are also included in that. And this, we're just talking regular ed. So it gets us closer to that number, and as opposed to the 85% number that we get right now. So essentially, the state pays us for 85% of the teachers Portland Public Schools claims. We would just get closer to that 100% mark. But it wouldn't drastically change anything.
I didn't expect it to.
Were you going to talk about this still? Elementary
Yeah,
school?
but
Okay,
go
I'm sorry.
ahead.
I can go.
Yeah.
Is there any detriment by keeping the class size the way it is? I mean, is it an improvement if we go to, this revised teacher-student ratio?
I mean, no, it's not an improvement. It's, it's an efficiency. It's not, I wouldn't say that it's an academic improvement to increase class sizes under any circumstances. Obviously, that just sort of, that goes, makes sense to just think, smaller class sizes are better. I do think that this is an efficiency. It's tighter management of the numbers, but I wouldn't say that it, again, if I thought that it was better to do that, that would have been in my original proposal. So no, I don't think it's better to do that.
And just to clarify again, that this is something that you would be managing to moving forward irrespective of this budget. Okay. So given that context, and given the flexibility that staff has, that if enrollment does drastically change at the beginning of the year, we've in the past been in positions where we've added positions where there's need. I feel comfortable with this information that it's more, that this is about efficiency right now, and I would be okay with keeping that in our proposal.
Since they're being quiet. Well, now, I think the community and our taxpayers look to us as well to create efficiencies where we can. And to Javier's point, if it does create efficiencies, I think that they would look to us to go there first. And so for me, I would go here because of the adjustment. Over the years, too, we've looked at the high school load, and we've continually evaluated that. And to Jenna's point, we don't allow the classrooms to get overly, and we review them all the time, looking at the class sizes, so we do add when we need to. So I'm comfortable with that, and I think that someone had talked about, well, you add that one particular student that it may be challenging, yes, but we also have ed techs in the classroom. I don't teach, I know I'm not an ed tech either, but again, creating efficiencies is where it comes for me. So, thank you.
So I guess I don't understand. What's the efficiency that's being created if it's not necessarily an improvement? I just don't understand that connection.
So let me give you an example. So you have in those numbers, you have, let me get my glasses, that always helps. So you have at Hall, fifth grade, 13 students per,
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. We're talking about the first
you have,
page.
under the current scenario, you would wind up with 13 students in each of those classes on average, and with the proposed numbers, it would go up to 17 and a third. So the efficiency is, in that particular place, you're saving a teacher position. You still have what would be considered in most places a very reasonable class size. And I would even say that even in Portland, we would consider that a very reasonable class size. So those are the efficiencies that you would be getting.
So we'd lose a teacher or a teaching position?
So again, I just want to be transparent about this. This proposal in its current state cuts 7 positions, 7 elementary teaching positions in the district. And that includes some places where, you know, there's a position added and then 2 positions lost and things along those lines. So I think that's where I'm saying that this is a more sort of data-driven approach to looking at our class sizes. And again, but not getting, this is not a mathematical formula that we're just going to live by and say that in every case, if you're under 20, it doesn't really matter. If you're under 20 and you've got, really difficult kids, we look to do things to support, good instruction in those classrooms. And, and it's also not to say that if you go, if you're below that threshold, that we're going to cut a position. Our commitment is to not cut a position. So if, for example, nobody showed up in that 4th grade at all, we would keep those positions. Well, that probably is an exaggeration. But if, the numbers were such that it went back down to 13, we wouldn't be like, oh, let's cut another position because we can, get you back up to 17.3 by doing that.
Just a follow-up to that discussion point about the positions. So because we have left the retirement incentive as something that we will want to offer, while the positions may be eliminated, it may not mean that those individuals who are in those positions would be. Could you explain that?
That's correct. So again, because we have the retirement incentive, and people come and go every year, so people don't necessarily stay static. So this does not mean that we would necessarily, the people that currently have jobs would not have jobs. We would expect that with just attrition and a retirement incentive that we would be able to retain all of those staff.
Additional go ahead.
Yeah, I would not support this. I hear, I guess, from elementary teachers that they need more support and more, more people. And also, part of our Portland Promise, one of the strategies is to make sure that each student has a meaningful relationship to an adult. And I think this is going to make that more difficult. And make it easier for one of our younger students to slip through the cracks and not have that meaningful connection. So I would not support it.
Can I add that? So, and I'm going to mix one of the other points. We understand that the retirement incentive amount is an estimate based on the 18 people. I would like us to, if that number is higher, I think the first thing that I would like to have addressed, if the number of people that take it is higher, I'd like the first thing to be kind of substituted would be this item, the class size, if that's the ultimate. Does that make sense what I'm saying? If that's ultimately the direction that we go with the budget.
I guess my question for that is, at one point, would we know, Superintendent Batana, if we were to put it out there, like when we hear back, what would the timeline be?
I don't know, is Barb here?
We're calling you up, Barb.
Barb Stoddard, our Director of Human Resources.
Casual Friday.
So can you repeat the question?
About the timing on a retirement incentive, when would we know? What would the expected timeline be for asking people and then having people sort of let us know? I know that.
But we could set that anywhere we want. Again, we would put out a letter once the board decides to move forward with it. And normally we would set at least, a 2-week to 1-month timeline, but depending on where we are in this process, I think would really dictate that.
I think that, the challenge is the speed and then the things that Mr. Rodriguez was talking about with, making sure that people are supported and given enough information to make sound decisions and things along those lines. I think that those two things, sort of bump up against each other. So, speed and quality are generally not the hand in hand.
Thank you. So I'm looking to my colleagues, if we're going to revisit this. I think if there are any more questions or so seeing none, I'm just going to keep moving forward. And if we need to revisit anything else that was on this list, we will. But we had a request from a finance committee member around the status of the superintendent's investments and additions to the FY2019 budget. And I'd like to take a moment to review that. And see if my colleagues have any additional questions. If there are things that we want to kind of pull out. So for me, when I look at, the areas that we are looking to trim and the areas that we're looking to invest, one of the things that I think about is what we currently have grants for that we would need to bring into the local side because those positions will not be continued. And if we don't fill it, there would be a huge gap. And so I'm thinking about the director of social emotional learning, the expanded learning opportunity coordinators. Programmatically, with those positions unfilled, it would create a huge gap. And so when I look at the Make It Happen coordinator, it doesn't rise to that same threshold. And so given that it is currently a position that is covered within an AmeriCorps role, it's been a position that we've had students, testify, and, the program has been strong in its current capacity. I know that I don't doubt that it could exceed our wildest expectations if we had, this position in there. But just in terms of like the scope of other additions and investments that we're making, it doesn't rise to that level at this point. And so I would put that position on I would like to propose that to be cut if my colleagues will entertain that.
I know we had people talk about it. I don't know if anyone can go into a little more detail, just to refresh my memory. I mean, what they add, what they do.
So Make It Happen is a program that is been in the district for a while, and it helps our first-generation students, immigrant students in particular, to build up their college-going credentials so that they will be able to maximize their potential. And so you've met, most recently Mulkey was here. She received an Aspen Institute grant last year. She'll be running a forum for students at Deering next week, I believe. So that's an example of the type of work that results from that. We have for a long time supported that with a coordinator position, Tim Cronin, who you've also met. And the actual sort of school-level work is done by AmeriCorps volunteers. So those are, folks that we pay very little for, that do a lot of work, but they rotate in and they rotate out. Generally, 1 year max is their stint. And so when you're really trying to build up a relationship with students and be able to grow the resume for those kids, it's hard to have people start every year fresh. And so that the idea behind this is to have people that are our employees, that are dedicated, that are going to be here for a period of time, and that's why this is priority. Last year, we highlighted that as part of the work that we committed to do in the Portland Promise. We think it's central to our commitment to having every student have a meaningful relationship with a caring adult. These are folks that not only do they do that work, but they find people to be mentors to our students. And so those are tremendously valuable positions. And right now we are doing it with people that are going to be with us for a year, and then they're going to move on, and then we're going to hopefully get another one that's really good and can continue to do that work. Last year we funded a position internally, so the person that is now at Portland High School was somebody who had previously been an AmeriCorps volunteer and would have rolled away, and she's amazing, and she has, she's with us now, and hopefully for a long time we'll continue to do that work.
So if we cut this funding, what happens to the program? Is it eliminated or run by volunteers?
It goes, as Member Van Dill suggested, we would continue to, find AmeriCorps volunteers to do it and hope that they turn out to be really good. And then every year we would, rotate somebody else in. And, so we would lose the we would lose the potential that we think is in there with having somebody who's part of the team for the long haul. And that's in no way, shape, or form to take away from the work that these guys have done, because they're amazing. But it's the, the long-term commitment part that we just can't get. So.
Yeah, based on that, I would not support cutting it. If we've been getting such good results with volunteers who are coming in and out, I can just, I would really want to see what we could do with someone who's there and is going to develop historical knowledge of the program and develop a network from, the students and that graduate and continue on. So I would not support that cut.
No, I would not support it either. I think having the continuity in that position, I think, adds greater value, and key word being meaningful relationship with the students. And I think that would allow that relationship to be more meaningful. So I wouldn't support it.
I just want to say for the dollar amount, we get probably double, if not triple back for that small amount. So I wouldn't support reducing that either.
I think the Make It Happen students who've come and I think they speak for themselves. It's an amazing program, so I'd be happy to support it as we can.
All right. Are there any additional questions or items that folks wanted to flag in the investments and additions? Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to bring it up even though I'm not on the Finance Committee. When I look at this list and I know that we have to, I mean, I'm not crazy to think that if we don't go a little further, that the council's not going to keep pushing and pushing. And I want us to make a good faith effort. And for me, while we need all of this stuff, and not stuff, but people and support systems to make our system stronger and stronger, these are things that, some of them, that didn't exist before. And so for me, while we need an assistant principal at Reiki because of the numbers to have parity, it's a new position. And right now, if we're reducing administrative cuts on central office for some very key positions that we put in place back when we had budget crisis and so on and so forth, that they could be in budget, they could be in HR, they could be here, there, anywhere, that if we put any of those things in central office, there's a lot of functions that happen there. And so for me, that position doesn't currently exist, and so if we have to reduce anywhere in central office, I think I'm not going to add a position that doesn't exist currently. That would be my request.
Alicia, I'm sorry. Do you mind scrolling down on this page a little bit, just for?
There's nothing at the bottom.
Oh,
What are you
because
looking
ours
for?
has something. The reductions are included in our printout.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted
So
to.
the thing that is not in this list is the 3 coordinator positions.
Content area.
Yes, sorry, the content area leadership positions.
Because, let me just explain, that's because those are included in the $800,000 in reductions that you approved on the other page.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, at this point, I don't see any cuts that I would support. I'm open to discussion at this point.
Just speaking about the Reiki assistant principal position, do we have the ratios? I'm sorry if that's been provided before, but what are the current ratios and how far out of proportion
So
is Reiki?
Reiki's a little bit different that way in that it's a teacher-led school. So this would not result in an assistant principal position. It would result in additional teacher leaders being freed up to be able to support the administrative functions at the school. And right now, they're short half a position, so that's essentially what this does. So they have, teacher leaders released the equivalent of one position. They previously had a 1.5, but they they made a decision as a teacher-led school to dedicate that half a position to be a counselor, an additional counselor position. But, since the time that Reike became a teacher-led school to the present, their numbers have increased fairly dramatically, so they have almost 100 more students today than they did at the time. It's a large, school. It's one of our larger schools now. It's our most overcrowded school, and for those of you who have been at Reike, know that it's, it's a challenging building for lots of different reasons. So we feel this is very justified, that they've been very patient and done an amazing job with the resources that they have. So that's why we included it in the budget this year.
Great, thank you.
I appreciate Ms. Thompson flagging this as a new position. This is something that I also had a question about and also felt like I needed more information. I think I feel comfortable hearing that context of the, the situation at Reike, that this warrants an additional 0.5 administrator position, but I would appreciate in the future if this is kind of built into the bigger budget process, around areas where we have identified gaps, where we have needs, staff that I look to you, Superintendent Batana, to, bring this to us, as,
Earlier than we did this time.
yes. Because when I first saw that, my inclination was, well, why do we have a 0.5 AP when it is a teacher-led school? And so having that explanation, having that information ahead of time would have been better. So I'm looking to my colleagues and looking at the question I had right now for discussion is if there are any questions around the status of the investments and additions. We're all good? Okay. So Alicia, we are, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to the proposal in front of us. So the last thing that I had from a follow-up from the previous meeting was the status around the reduction in student days and the costs associated with that. So if Superintendent Batana, it looks like we have a handout in the packet around this. Want to pull that up?
Let me just tee it up a little bit, and then you can walk through the details of it. So we were asked, because as you recall, in the new investments, and I don't know, was it in the investments sheet that we just looked at, the 2 days? Anyway,
Yes, it was.
So there was $183,000 that were in there as a proposed investment, and that would be to support our secondary teachers coming to work this summer, and primarily to work with teams of teachers to develop their implementation for our standards-led, our standards-based work that we're doing sort of In some places, you think about it as the proficiency work. So it's really to be able to support 2 days for all of our secondary teachers, our middle school and our high school teachers. After the last meeting, Chair Vendil and I talked a little bit about that, and she wanted me to explore the possibility of doing that differently. And it was particularly in the context of some of the conversations we've had about the fact that we have 178 student days when we're only required to have 175 by the state. And so the proposal that we put together is one that eliminates 2 days of student instruction. So in essence, what it would mean is that right now our kids come back to school the week before. Is it Labor Day or Memorial Day? Labor Day?
Labor Day.
Labor Day for 2 days, then we have the long Labor Day weekend, and then they come back to school. And so in this scenario, kids would not start until after Labor Day, but teachers would continue to have their regular schedule. So, the conversation happened in the context of concessions. Could we get concessions and deduct 2 days of pay from the teachers? And, the answer to that is no. And so this, teachers would continue to be paid the same, and they would have those 2 days as professional development days where we wouldn't have to pay them extra to come during the summer to do that. So that's part of it. So that takes $183,000 off of the table. Our other contracts, our other staff have a different structure in their contracts. So our base employees, our ed techs, and our base and ed tech units, which the base also includes our transportation, food service, and secretarial workers. They have a different structure in their contracts that says that staff will get the student calendar year plus X number of days. So it ranges from 2 to 5 additional days. And so if we reduce the student year, their contract would allow us to bring that down to however, so in this case, they would lose 2 days. We would need to impact bargain that, and we've had conversations with both of the units to let them know that this is on the table and this would be a possibility. And so that's the sort of the general context, and then I'll let Alicia walk through the numbers associated with that.
So these are estimated contract days. In many cases, it just ends up being a proportional amount less, so those vary. And then I will note for the full year and the non-rep employees, one thing that Javier was clear about is that if everyone else is doing this, so is the non-rep group. So these would be essentially 2 furlough days that we're talking about here for the non-rep employees. So if we essentially drop 2 contract days for these groups, it would result in approximately $230,000 of savings on top of the 183 that we just talked about. So essentially what this does, and we talked about this earlier, but I'll just talk about it again. So we take the current salary amount and we essentially reduce that proportionally by the contract days. The benefits stay the same. So if we reduce people's FTE, we generally don't reduce their medical expenses. So their benefits and medical would stay static, so you don't see that those amounts change. But their retirement and Medicare are also variable dependent upon their salary number, so those would also proportionally get reduced. So that represents the $230,000. The 183 is the 2-day planning institute that was a new investment. So essentially, we would replace that with the teachers freed up 2 days.
Can I ask about the negotiation that's involved? Does that mean that this $230,000 is not set in stone? That's something that we have to work out with the groups?
Yes, that's right.
So
this would represent the maximum that we would potentially save. I mean,
Right.
I would expect that we would, impact bargain and, settle somewhere beneath that number.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that was actually a really good explanation, and then it kind of,
That makes it 1 for 12.
Pardon me? Yeah, what was that?
That makes me 1 for 12.
Oh, bam, there you go. It's a reason to keep trying, Javier.
Chipper on a Friday.
Just wanted to add to it, Sarah, just kind of, and this is something that we've talked about. The state asked that we have 175 days. We have 3 additional days. So we are already above what the state mandates. Just wanted to put that out again. I know that's been part of the context in this conversation, but just to remind people, that's how we have 3 extra days to play with, and to consider, not to play with.
As weary as I am about relying on that 230 as a figure for us to, call like savings when it's not guaranteed, I think we should explore it. I think that this is, while it's not ideal, this is, what we have within our means to be able to use, to find some savings around transitioning 2 student days to 2 professional days. I really believe the one thing that I hear so much about from our teachers is the need for high-quality professional development, and I just know from, experiences hearing from other school districts that, it's not enough to do it, sporadically throughout the year, having an intensive from all of the things that I've heard about the curriculum and the program, the course offerings. It is the right type of activity that we should be investing in. If it comes to, 2 student days, it's the only option that we have. I think we should pursue it, knowing that it may not net the full savings that we hope, but I think it's still worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm open to exploring it as long as, those 2 days are for teacher development. Let's not, just waste those days. I'd rather have the students in there, learning. But if we're going to cut 2 days, then yeah, let's have the teachers, getting into development. And then just a question about how we would reflect this on the budget. My initial thought is not to even include this, maybe like an asterisk, like here's an additional possibly, whatever, 230 that we can save, just to accurately reflect what our budget is going to be.
So just to, Alicia pointed out that 183, that was only for secondary teachers, and it was built on the assumption that 80% of them would attend. So in terms of the benefit of this is that this is for all of our teachers, so everybody would have those days. So, but I concur. I think that, we're providing here the maximum, and we should, have some kind of contingent options in there, so we could also price out if it was, half of that or something along those lines. And so,
Can I ask about the Summer Institute? It was 183,000, something like that. Would all of that cost be saved by shifting it to those 2 days? Okay.
yeah, because that would be, everybody would work those 2 days, they would be built into their contract, so it would be for everyone, and it would add in elementary teachers because they were not included in that original proposal.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that there weren't like some sort of someone that we're bringing in that, any additional expenses.
That was just the stipend costs, so.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can we, Alicia, bring back up the spreadsheet? Thank you.
Do you want me to add those 2 things?
Let's hear from my colleagues.
So I was going to ask to bring this up. So as I'm looking at the picture that we're beginning to draw here, a lot of the quote-unquote hit is being bared by teachers. When I look at class sizes, when I look at ed techs, when I look at retirement incentives, and that's starting to kind of feel odd to me. I just wanted to say that's what's on my mind right now.
I think that it's something that I'm going to just reiterate what I said before. So I think it's something that we should pursue, but I don't, given that this and the retirement incentive isn't actual numbers, I just don't even know how we can put them in there, which if we take out the retirement incentive, it leaves us with a lower figure. So we can continue to have this conversation, or we can say this is where we landed, but I just want to let you know that this is we need to keep moving.
So we're just talking about putting in was it the 230?
Yeah, the reduction of 2 student days.
Right. I mean,
But can I just point out, I mean, there's 2 pieces to that. One is the savings on the Summer Institute side, so that's 183. That's firm. That's not a, that's not a floating number. That's a firm number. And then there's the 230, which is the max. So if you wanted to, you wanted to assume half of that, we could assume half of that. And that just, or if you want to include none of it, and then if we get it, great. But, I just want to sort of separate the 183, which is real, from the other one, which is, it has to be negotiated. But where we, again, believe that we have the ability to do that under the contract language.
So if I were to propose to put a number up there, it would be under the heading of reduce 2 student days, and then the number would be 133,431?
183,000.
83, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that, just so that we can see what that looks like, and then
So-
we can continue to have this discussion, but I just want to make sure that's quantified. And then maybe an asterisk next to the reduced 2 student days. And an asterisk next to the retirement incentive.
So this is concrete.
This
Like,
is
we can
concrete.
take
This
this
doesn't
out
need
of the
a-
budget,
this
and
does not need an
and
asterisk.
what would
Okay.
happen is we don't have it. We would just not do the 2-day institute if we then couldn't get the money back in for that time. So I just want to be clear that this, I don't think is an asterisk. We can say it's out, and then if there's no room created by reducing student days, then it just doesn't happen.
Okay.
No, I'm not quite there.
No?
No.
Okay.
No. So I think that this requires reducing the student days. Okay, so there's no question about that. And then we absolutely save the 183,000. There's the additional 230,000 that could be saved by getting those concessions implemented in the contracts for base and ed tech. And if you're uncomfortable with that, then we can just make it a 0 and bring them back and just do professional development for 7 days for people that have 5 days, for, 5 days for people who have 3 days, for, 4 days for people who have 2 days, because they wouldn't be working with kids on those days, because there wouldn't be any kids to work with. But, so if you want to quantify that at 0, great, and then we'll still work to see what we can do in negotiations with those units, and whatever that amounts to is additional, is additional savings down the road. But if, I also, in the same way that we did with the retirement incentives, you can sort of come up with a number that is a potential savings that seems realistic, that doesn't, that isn't like the whole thing, and, and work from that point. So.
Discussion.
I'm still where I was at, man.
Student days are really important, so I think we should not do this lightly, but I like the creative thinking, I guess, of, trying to, figuring out a way to save in two ways with one thing, but I think, we have those extra student days for a reason. It's not, they're effective. They cut the summer shorter, which I know students aren't always a fan of, but the summer slide happens, and happens in particular for students with less means to have enriching summer experiences. So it's something that if we decide to go forward with, I think we should do with a lot of thought and.
I think that for the purposes of our discussion, I think we should take it off and have this be something that we talk and bring to discussion with the full board. I think that this is bigger than just this one committee, and I don't want it to be baked into a budget process. And I appreciate all the work that we've done. I think that this helps cue it up for the board to have a conversation around it, but I don't, but I think that the authority, I think, lies beyond the finance committee in this realm. Yeah, okay.
And then we had one more thing.
Yep, there was a health insurance update.
So I'll let Alicia.
So we received our notification from the MEA Benefits Trust. We had budgeted a 9% health insurance increase, and we just received notice that we were getting a 7.66% insurance increase. So the way that this works is that we, per our contracts, we only include 3% in for our teachers and our administrators. So those groups that will not be affected by this change. And as a reminder, that's overwhelmingly our largest group. So this is really ed tech space and non-reps. But it's an additional savings of $68,100 that we feel very comfortable putting forward as a reduction.
Okay. Go ahead, can you?
Go down.
Yes. Yay. So I do want to be aware of the time. We do need to put forward an action and also have public comment. So also, I want to make sure we are, we are pretty solid that this is like the summary of where we want to land for the Finance Committee proposal for this budget. And so I want to give my colleagues another opportunity to weigh in or to make a proposal. Otherwise, we will move forward with this.
So I just want to make sure I understand where we are procedurally, right? I mean, procedurally, we're saying that the Finance Committee is going to vote on a budget to propose to the full school board, right? We're
And the
not,
budget amount would be and that's updated to reflect the 1.7?
Yep.
Okay. It would
And-
be 111,600,000.
and the proposed tax increase would be 7.56, is that right?
The tax
Seven-
rate increase would be
Okay, gotcha.
7.19.
7.19, okay. So, yeah, I mean, procedurally, if we're looking at it, just getting it up to the school board for a full discussion, I mean, I can support that. But if I were to vote on this budget right now, I would not support the administrative cuts at that level. I would support it at a certain level, and I think we'd have to get into an executive session to specifically talk about that. But I would not support the level at that level, cut at that level, just because I understand that the superintendent has put his team together, and I think he has a great plan for us to move forward with the school district, and I think he does need those people in there to help him do that. And so I would not support at that level if I were to vote on it now. But as far as sending it up to the full school board, I am fine with that. As far as elementary school class size, you know, I asked questions about whether, you know, what I'm missing, what am I missing? You know, what are we creating here by changing the ratios? You know, we're creating efficiencies, and if I recall, from what I got, it's not necessarily an improvement. Is that accurate? I mean, okay. And so at this point, I would not support increasing the elementary class sizes. And the reason I say that is that I personally look at this. I have a 2- and a 3-year-old that are going to be 3 and 4 this year, and I project and I see them in these elementary school classes, and I would not want. I would want the smallest, you know, I want the, you know, a better ratio for my kids. And so that's what I want for the other students in Portland. So at this point, I would advocate that we do not send that up to the full board. And then the others, I'm fine with sending that up to the school, full board.
Roberto?
Okay. So to be clear, what I would like to send to the board, I think I've made very clear along the process, is what was presented on March 6th. This is, and I hate the words, but this is due diligence, right? This is us having a discussion. I appreciate the way that we discuss and we've given information about each item. Now, after the discussions today and understanding what the process ahead of us is, I would be okay sending this to the board and then seeing what comes out of that at that level. But I think along the way, I hope I've done a good job at expressing each of these different items where I stand and my rationale. I reserve the right to change my mind as we continue to dig. No, because really there's a lot of points that even came up today that honestly I might not have considered, and they're swaying me one way or the other. So I think as the process goes, taking this to the next level as a school board, I think I'm as of right now, I'm okay with it.
And if I may add something, just to provide context, you know, for why I would, you know, why I'm fine with this going up to the full board with, you know, certain exceptions. I think that this is a broader conversation that we need to have that isn't reflected in our budget. I think that in this proposed budget, I think that we need to have a conversation about redistricting and consolidation, and that's going to be tough. So we can't capture that obviously in this budget, but what we can say is that, you know, we do have a long-term plan about looking and right-sizing our infrastructure, if that's, you know, if that's where we want to go. And so with that in mind, I think we can, I would hope if we come to that with consolidation and redistricting, we could also see additional savings, as well as finding efficiencies and perhaps improving the types of programs that we can offer to our students. So I just wanted to provide some context for this budget.
If you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, I'll just say, when this does come to the board, I'm going to oppose the class size, the elementary class size increases, certainly, as the one that really jumps out at me. But I'm excited to take up and talk it over as a full board and as a full community. I think we really need to understand that when the state reduces our subsidy, that impact, we could absorb it all in our schools. We could pass it all along to the taxpayers, but I think that we need to have a full community discussion to determine what our priorities are as a community and where we see the future of public education in our city. And so I really appreciate the way that this was all framed up in your budget, Javier. I think that, we are very much at a decision point, and we all need to be digging into all of these details, and it's really large, complex web. I'm not on the finance committee because I felt like I'm not very comfortable with finances, and this all seemed very intimidating, and there's certainly a lot of moving pieces here. But I think that this is a year where that was not a luxury that I could afford, and I think that that's the same for all of us in the community who care about what our tax rate is, who care about what our level of education is, and who care about the future of our city. So I'm glad to be engaging at the level that I am right now. I don't have a big ending for that, but I'm excited to be a part of this larger community discussion because it's really, really important.
I feel like we're engaging in debate before we even have a motion, but I think for the purposes of just trying to get through this, we'll just keep going forward. So I think pardon?
Hear from the public.
Yeah, I know. Once we have a motion, we will have public comment once we have a motion. I would actually see if there's support from my colleague, Roberto, to remove the elementary class size from the list. And if that's something that
You know what? I think that in generally in my life, when I get this feeling, the right move is to walk away. So right now, I say take that out of the board.
All right. Take it off. Okay. So, and I know that this is not going to end here. So I think this is where I hear our committee has this is where our energy is in terms of being able to consider all of the options that we've had, from school consolidation to school closures to looking at the investments, looking at where we can trim, and knowing that there's a bigger context and discussion that we need to have around revenue. This is where we've landed, is what I hear from my colleagues. And so I am looking for a motion I'm looking for a motion on the Finance Committee recommendation budget for that amount. If someone could please entertain a motion. Go ahead, Mark. Give the motion.
I move that we send this proposed budget with the summary of proposed cuts up to the full school board.
If you wouldn't mind giving the actual Finance Committee recommended.
So the Finance Committee recommended dollar amount is $111,966,948.
Do I have a second? Roberto?
Thing that changes.
Any clarifying questions? Discussion? At this time, I would like to open it up for public comment. And please state your name, your address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please no applause or booing. We would like to respect all views.
Hi, John Thibodeau, 114 Clinton Street. Just want to thank you for your deliberation and hard work, and just it's pretty cool. Democratic process, community members caring about their city, communities, communicating with elected officials. So I really appreciate that, and all the people that are here. So thank you. And also, I was just wondering if one of you could do a quick overview of what the next process steps will be, so people understand where this goes, because I know there'll be at least 3 or 4 more steps. It's confusing, so thank you.
Good evening.
Typically, we don't respond to public comment directly,
Just do
but
it at the end of
we'll do it at the end because it is a question about process and next steps, so.
Good evening. My name is Audrey Cabral, and I am the coordinator for the music department in Portland Public Schools. I'm also a band director at 6 schools, at 2 middle schools and 4 elementary schools. And I was ready to speak to the proposed cut, so I'm not going to take any more time. I'd offer to play the piano, but I'm not sure that's what you need at this point. But I'd like to thank you. In my 29 years of teaching in Portland, I've been up here quite a few times, and so I'd like to thank you for your hard work as a spouse of someone who was on the school board for a long time. I know the work that you do, and I truly appreciate that you've taken general music right now, proposing to take it off the table. So thank you very much for your hard work.
Good evening. My name is Ben Grant. I'm a resident of 70 Payson Street. I'm here in my role as president of the Ocean Ave Elementary PTO. As you probably know at this point, we've spent a lot of time over the last several days figuring out what role the PTOs can play in this process to be most helpful to you. You're the ones who possess the knowledge of the details and the numbers that Member Atkinson is scared of, and I think we are too. So we felt that the best contribution we could make to you was just tell you what our values were. I think with every dollar amount that you have to consider, every dollar amount is tied to a value. And I think it's important for the PTO community as a whole to speak as one voice as best as we can. So as I sent to you earlier today, I just want to tell you and tell the public what our values are as we evaluate your work. So as we've said, the PTO is a community, and we have 6 signatories to our resolution at this point, and I hope to collect them from all of the schools in Portland. But as I've written, our values here are: don't consolidate, don't close any schools, don't increase any class sizes, no reductions in school safety measures, and don't eliminate any programming in music, art, PE, and foreign languages. That's the consensus of the PTOs. Those are the things we hold in the highest esteem and we value the most for our kids and for everyone's kids. So with those values in mind, I want to thank you on behalf of the PTOs for the work you've done tonight. It's been a great discussion to listen to, and if you continue on this track, I think you'll find that the PTOs are supportive. Regardless of what you do, I want you to know the PTOs want to be helpful and be partners in your work, and look forward to the next step. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Roger Burley. I'm a resident of Cliff Island, and I just wanted to step up briefly and say that we can't overstate the importance of the school to the Cliff Island community. I have worked on this exact same thing of making sure that we have a school on Cliff and have enough students to make it a significant school for the foreseeable future. I stood at one of these meetings in 1968 where we faced a similar situation of a smaller, of decreasing number of students. The school board and the city council stepped forward and said, no, we understand how important the school is to the Cliff community, and we did the same thing again in 1995. And so here we are again, 23 years later. Sarah, by the way, thank you for your response to Steve Little this afternoon. I chair a thing called the Maine Islands Coalition, which is an organization of the 15 year-round island communities on the Maine coast. 6 of those communities are very small, have anywhere from 0 to 8 or 9 students in their schools, and we work all the time. All of these 6 islands, and I'm not going to say that the larger islands don't work very hard on their communities as well, because they do. But we work with the support of the Island Institute and the residents of these 6 islands to make sure that the schools stay open, because without the schools, young people cannot live there, they cannot move there. And one of the, you're probably aware that one of the strategies that has come out of the Island Institute's support is the Teaching and Learning Collaborative, where these 6 schools are connected electronically, so that instead of having 3 schools like Cliff, 3 kids like Cliff has, and 2 like Matinikas has, that there's 40 to 50 students, really all in a group, and they don't feel alone. They have book groups, they have student council meetings, they do all kinds of things so that they're really strengthened. And so I hope another 23 years we don't have to come and do this again, because the city has been really understanding about the importance of our school. And we work on Cliff, and it's obvious from the Peaks people here tonight as well that we're willing to work as hard as we can to sustain our own community, and we don't want to ask anything that we don't need, but we do need to have our school. So thank you so much for your consideration. We really appreciate it. It makes all the difference. Thank you.
Hello, April Fournier, 1241 Washington. I actually wasn't going to say anything tonight, but Mr. Atkinson made a really great point, and it just reminded me of the joint Finance Committee meeting with the City Council, and I thought it was a really important point that now that the funding formula has changed with the amount of money that we're going to get from the state, I think we really need to look at how we're going to do budgeting and how we're going to prioritize how we fund our schools, because we're not going to be getting money like we were getting money from the state. And so I think we really have to look at our community as a whole and how we prioritize education. And I think this is a great budget, and I am fully supportive of what we're doing for our students as a parent, as a special educator, and as someone who is looking at the future of the students in Maine. I think it's incredibly important to look at, looking at this whole student philosophy, and I really believe in it, and I believe in this budget. I think this is a very strong budget, and I'm looking forward to those conversations with the City Council. I believe you can go into these very strong. I'm going to be anxious to watch these. I've sent an email to Mayor Strimling as well as my city councilors to say, you need to look at this in a different way. It can't just be, hey, school board, you need to figure out where to make your cuts. It needs to be, as a community, we need to reprioritize how we budget our community, not just the school board. So thank you guys, you've done a great job.
My name is Randy Schaefer. I live out on Peaks Island, 21 Elizabeth Street. I'm a member of the Peaks Island Council. And I really want to commend you on how thoughtful your deliberations were today. This is the first Board of Ed meeting, committee of the board that I've attended, and I'm really, really impressed about how much thought you gave to some very hard decisions that you had to make. I have to guess that you were under a lot of pressure. And we really appreciate not only the folks on Peaks Island, who, as you saw, were here and had to leave to be able to make the boat home, but to all the parents and all the kids in the city of Portland. Peaks Islanders are very grateful for what you did for our school, but we're also very grateful that you have the strength and the courage to resist the pressure that you must be facing to make sure that there is robust funding for the city's educational programs and the opportunities that we afford our kids. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ryan Hutchins. I live at 94 Christie Road here in Portland. A first-year teacher here in Portland, 13-year teacher overall, but my first year here in Portland. Teach Spanish at Lyman Moore Middle School and have 2 boys in the Spanish immersion program at Lyseth Elementary. So in that vein, following along lines with my colleague earlier spoke about the reduction or the removal of the music from the proposed cuts. I also want to thank you on that end for removing the world languages. Having taught in a district before that did not support foreign language at the elementary school level, and now teaching in a middle school that does support that, I can tell you the difference that I've seen in the kids this year at the middle school level, even compared to the high school age students I taught before. So just to point out from a point of view of someone who's taught in both scenarios, how valuable that is. So I definitely very much appreciate that. And also just want to thank you for the work you've done. And also to follow on the lines of what the woman who spoke just a few minutes ago about it need to be a whole community process. When I look at how generous the city of Portland is to its residents, and I've been very proud of that. I'm a lifelong Portland resident, and I hope that tradition continues. But thinking along those lines, if I think of the phrase, if you give a man a fish, he eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. We're teaching a lot of young men and women how to fish, and we put a lot of funds into families that are having difficulties later on in life. We're trying to teach these young men and women to be able to care for themselves as they get older. So I think the biggest social service we provide is our school system, and to make sure that we support that for all our students is extremely valuable. And that's something that I know you consider very thoughtfully, and I'm appreciative of that, and I want to make sure that our entire city does the same thing. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Emily Figdor. I live at 31 Cushman Street. I'm the director of Protect Our Neighborhood Schools, but also the co-chair of the Reiki PTO, and I'm going to speak tonight as in that capacity. I want to mention 2 things, and I have some personal experience with large class sizes at Reiki in the 2014-2015 school year. My daughter was in 2nd grade at the time, my older daughter, and she was in a class with 26 at the height of, Reiki's a very transient community, so the class size could shift, shifts, all the class sizes shift throughout the year. At its peak, they had 27 students in her 2nd grade class. My daughter is a very driven, focused, kid who loves to be challenged and has every single day of her life loved to be in school until that 2nd grade year when she lost her passion for school. And when I figured that out and started talking to other parents, I heard kids that were very different than my child having different but also very similar problems with the large class size. Kids were getting left behind. The teacher was doing the best she could, but it's just a lot of kids. we were very fortunate that some parents got together and made the case to the former superintendent that the class sizes, that 2 incoming class sizes the following year at Reiki, her class and the class below her would be too big, as well as a grade at Reiki at Riverton, and they added teachers. So I was very fortunate that the district was very responsive. And the idea that you would more aggressively manage class sizes sounds really good to me, because if we just allow class sizes to shift at will, you do get in situations like we got into at Reiki in the past. And I just can't underscore the difference that I saw in my own daughter's experience. And then second, specific to Reiki, is the issue of, I was really glad to see that you kept in the half FTE for a lead teacher at Reiki. Just to be clear, Reiki does not have the same administrative support as do other schools. When Reiki moved to the lead teacher model, which is tremendous, I think really core to why Reiki is such a special school and why children are very successful at the school. We had 325 kids. We now have 430. So we have the same administrative staff supporting, another 105 kids. There isn't parity across the district. I checked in with the lead teacher about it today because I knew it was on the agenda and got kind of her latest thinking. And she said that she sees it as a public safety issue because they don't have the capacity to interface with the kids the way they need to. She also said that they're not able to do the staff development and management that they need to. So I know that it's not popular to spend money on administration, but this is a teacher position, and it is core to the model that the district's been really wonderful in trying and investing in and pioneering. I mean, Reiki is a really unique school, and I can say a school that is so beloved, largely because of the teacher-led model. So please invest, continue to support that teacher-led model by enabling us to have the administrative resources to do it the right way, especially as we're bursting at the seams. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's David Hopkinson, 9 Grafton Street, here in Portland. Last time I asked you for an extra minute. I'll be respectful and ask you for 30 seconds, if that is possible, or I'll just start talking. That's fine. Thank you again for sitting and not only listening, but taking to heart the comments you have heard over the last couple of weeks. 2 paths diverged in the woods, and I like to think of myself as more creative than using someone else's words. I went to school with Mr. Frost's great-grandchildren. We talked at length about him and his words. It was always interesting to me that they believed it was about finding their own path. Neither of them ever talked about which path they would take. They talked about the path that they needed to take. There is no path to choose here. I shake a lot. I don't know why. I need to eat more. Sorry. There is only making a new path, finding a new way to do things, finally standing up and saying enough is enough. This is not the future of funding education. No matter what cuts are made in the superintendent's budget, we have lost our way and started following a path that we've been on before. In each of these meetings, elected officials take the time to praise the superintendent and the job he has done. I was at the Presumpscot School today this morning making some photocopies. I made them double-sided. I only made what I needed, and I distributed them properly. So don't worry, I didn't waste any money. A number of teachers approached me, and they wanted to talk about the budget. You know what one of them led off with? This is the best superintendent I have ever worked for. She's worked in education longer than I've been alive. So the expert in what our community needs, has put together a budget that maintains the current educational vision of the Portland Promise and incrementally moves Portland towards being the best school district in Maine. And we've balked at it. Why? To get to a number. It appears some progress has been made towards an arbitrary number. It appears the superintendent and you are in agreement in what is technically feasible to take out of the school budget. So maybe art, music, gym, languages, and all the other invaluable services our school provide to the students are safe for another 12 months. But if you have cut everything you can, as far away from the students as you can, and you still project a 9% increase next year, clearly those basic educational needs will be on the chopping block again, and there will be little tolerance for any incremental progress. So again, enough. The crossroads is more dire than the people in this community believe it is. It is no longer acceptable to stay on this road. We need the crossroads. We need to stand up and take action. That's a little more than usual. We need you to unanimously vote against the proposed budget from today and immediately vote on the superintendent's original budget. We need you to pass it unanimously. Then we need you to campaign like it's re-election time, because it is. This community will take notice of this moment. Remember, there is nothing personal about not voting for this school budget. You're on the damn education board. You clearly care about our students. And of course, no one in this community wants higher taxes, but we will also not stand by and watch education only be spoke about in cutting terms. Let's do this together. Let's take a stand. Let's go find the money. Pass the superintendent's original budget. Thank you.
Stephen Sharford, Cumberland Avenue. I appreciate that you found $1.4 million in potential reductions in the superintendent's proposed budget. I want to make it clear they are not cuts to the school budget, they are reductions in the increase. And folks need to understand it in those terms, that the budget is increasing, it is not being cut, like lots of people like to say. And so the title should actually be changed because it's not correct. I'd also suggest that where it says health insurance, it should be listed as health insurance savings. It's not a cut to the health insurance, it's a savings based on what the projected actual cost will be. I asked the committee and the superintendent, what would you do if no kids showed up to Cliff Island School next year? There are only 2 kids there. If no kids showed up, would you spend $170,000 running a school? Would you hire 2.45 staff people? I need an answer as to why we even have 2.5 people for a school with 2 kids in it. It makes no sense. That needs to be justified. You're adding to your budget a director of social emotional learning. Yes, it's nice that we had one, but I don't think we can really afford it, and I would suggest that that's a place for reduction for your committee to consider. The Bayside Learning Community cost us, I wrote here I guess $1.3 million. I was thinking I had a different number there. Cost us $1.3 million to run, and that's 35 students, and it's $38,000 per student. I do understand that kids come and go there, so it fluctuates a lot. But there's got to be a better model for running that operation far less expensively. And specifically, running that operation out of the central office school building makes no sense at all. And I'm sure adds significantly to its cost, whether it's hidden costs or not, because it's probably shown as part of the central office building budget. Which leads me actually to the next piece. That central office building, I told you several years ago that it was a mistake to buy that building, and apparently it was a poor decision. You have some documents in your previous backups regarding appraisal, a broker's appraisal you had done.
Stephen, you are out of time. Would you like an extension?
Yes, please.
All right. Go ahead.
That you have a broker's appraisal that, shows that it's not even worth the $3 million we paid for it. It's only worth about $2 million. I think that information should be widely publicized, that we bought a building that's not even close to being worth what it is. And we really should, the board should work on plans to divest itself of that building and move staff into existing buildings where apparently there's plenty of space in the two high schools, because they're significantly underutilized at this point. You took the Planning Institute cost off the table, which makes no sense at all. There's, you eliminate those 2 class days and you could have those teachers in training for the first 2 days. It makes no sense for kids to even come to school before Labor Day. I don't know why anybody would run a school and have it operate before Labor Day. It makes no sense. And we should follow the model that the governor of Maryland did, and that is he required all schools to start after Labor Day. You have not, one last thing is PAS, $3.2 million. I would suggest that we divest ourselves of PAS and force PAS to become a private entity, quasi-governmental entity of some sort, so that we are not burdened by the costs that the state has imposed on us for that by dropping into the CTE category. I've never felt that Portland should operate the PAS operation, that it should be a separately run operation, and would recommend that this is the time to do it, since the state has decided that it's not, that they want to essentially screw us for it. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Strimling. I'm the mayor of the city of Portland. I just want to stand up and say thank you for your work this evening. I stand ready to support and fight for the superintendent's original budget. I think it was the right investment moving forward. I think you've done some good work tonight. You protected some of the most important parts that I think the community has said we need to preserve. I was very pleased at the end that you took off taking away the 2 school days from our students and reducing the ratio for our elementary school kids. I think taking those away was an important example of your putting kids first for our community. I'm also very pleased that you kept in place the $1.1 million that the superintendent was looking in terms of additional work that needs to happen to make our schools all they can be. As I've said over and over again, I want the city of Portland to have the best schools in the state, and you cannot do that by cutting and going backwards. You can only do that by continuing to move forward. And tonight I will agree with Stephen Scharf in there is an investment in these schools tonight. You are increasing and asking the community to invest an additional $6 million into our schools, and I think that's smart. I do think you should look at the administrative cuts, whether that has to happen in executive session, in order to make sure the superintendent has the resources and the people he needs to oversee the schools and make sure they are as exceptional as we expect them to be. And I hope you take a hard look at the ELL ed techs just to make sure that's not going to have any impact on our immigrant community. But really, honestly, you did some very good work tonight. You had a lot of courage to stand up and say our kids and our schools have got to come first. And I look forward to the conversation at the school board, and then when it comes to the city council and the finance committee, for us making sure that we, on our side, also make decisions based on what's best for the kids. So thank you.
Good evening. Sue Olafson, President of the Portland Education Association. Thank you for supporting so much of the superintendent's original budget. in putting student education and student safety first. It's not easy to stand for public education when the state is cutting your revenue and the city's calling for minimal tax increases. So I appreciate your courage. But there is still a lot of work to be done, as you know. First, we need to educate voters this spring, and then have those difficult citywide conversations in the future about what investments to make, where to make cuts, and how to increase revenue so that Portland can maintain quality schools that we can be proud of into the future. But your teachers and ed tech stand with you, and we're ready to help with those difficult conversations and to propose solutions where we can. Thank you.
Any last public comment? Okay, so we're closing public comment, and we're opening up debate on the action of approving a Finance Committee recommended budget at $111,966,948. Discussion, debate?
I'm ready to vote.
I'm ready to vote as well, and I understand the discussion at the board level is going to be a in-depth one, and I look forward to it.
I wanted to thank everyone for participating in this process. First of all, the Finance Committee. Second of all, my colleagues on the board who are here tonight and who were with us before. And then third of all, most importantly, the public who has been with us as we have, encountered these, challenging circumstances. This is not the end of the conversation. It's us continuing our work moving forward to get this to the full board and then to the city council. I do want to echo what others have said tonight about, the challenging conversations ahead with the city, that this, is, we're a city that's been flourishing, a city with a lot of opportunities, a lot of economic development and investments, and yet, to be in a situation where we have these, where we have to even consider and entertain cuts is unthinkable. But we're certainly here because, the picture of state funding has changed. The legislature chose not to implement the will of the voters with question 2. And, as a result, we are put in a batch of, biggest losers in terms of the school funding formula. So I will say for those members of the public who are here who had asked about what was next, once we take action tonight, we will be sending this budget to the full board for first read on Tuesday, April 2nd, 3rd? Third. We will have a workshop on it as well as an executive session. The next upcoming meeting that we have with the city will be next Thursday at 5:30 at City Hall. That will be a joint finance and the Finance Committee with the school board and the city. So I don't want to delay any further. It's been a long night. So I'm going to call for a vote for the motion that we have for the Finance Committee recommended budget. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And no one in opposition, and it passes unanimously with 3 out of 4 members present.
Madam Chair, can you just clarify, is there a public hearing on the first read? So when is the public hearing and vote on the school board?
It is currently scheduled for the 12th.
Public hearing and vote.
Public hearing and vote.